In a series of talking about the DPDP rules, the draft rules that have come out, we want to talk today about the requirement of registration of a consent manager with the Data Protection Board of India. Welcome to my YouTube channel where you daily see new content on data privacy, and as I said, today we are going to talk about the requirements of registration of a consent manager. That means we are saying that consent manager is no more an internal function. It's an authorized registered people or organizations under the Data Protection Board whom you can hire as your consent manager. What are the various obligations that have come up under the DPDP rules? The first one, of course, the privacy notice that we talked about yesterday. Then the consent manager, which we are going to talk about now, and in the next 3-4 videos we are going to cover the entire thing. It's a long topic. We are then going to talk about the other obligations like handling of data for the people who get subsidies, the reasonable security safeguards that the government has announced, intimation of the personal data breach if it happens at a fiduciary, along with the timelines for these intimations, and the process of a variable consent while an organization or a fiduciary is processing children's data. So these are the new obligations that have come in for fiduciaries, and as discussed in all the videos, we are going to talk about them one by one, starting today with the consent manager. The purpose of a consent manager, the role of a consent manager is to take informed and specific consent from the data principals. I am collecting your personal data for this purpose, right? And I'll explain you what is the purpose of collecting, what services am I going to deliver, and you can then decide whether you want me to do that or not. So until you give me the consent, I can't process your personal data. And in fact, in DPDP rules, we are saying that we need to map each of the consents with the exact service that we are trying to deliver against that consent, right? Consent manager also needs to manage a record of those consents and keep a provision of withdrawal of the consents, which is one of the data principles, user rights in case of the DPDP Act. To obtain a specified informed consent, the consent manager or the fiduciary has to help the principals to understand, and on behalf of the fiduciary, this is the work of a consent manager to help the principals to understand the real purpose of why the data is being collected. The consent management has to be easy enough that people can easily decide as well as easily withdraw their consents. The process of registration is relatively simpler. The organization that is willing to be acting as consent manager for other fiduciaries should be incorporated in India, should have sufficient physical, technical, commercial knowledge to handle multiple projects of consent management, and then their net worth should be at least 2 crore rupees. They should act as and be a responsible organization as good as the data fiduciary itself. So consent manager's role is as good as a fiduciary. They are equally responsible as fiduciary. So contracting between consent manager and fiduciary has to be taken care of accordingly. Therefore, it is also expected that the consent manager would have no conflict of interest with any individual, directors, key stakeholders, key senior management in the data fiduciary. And the directors and the stakeholders in the consent management firm should have a good market reputation, right? They should understand that the process of taking a consent is in interest of the data principals, right? While indirectly, anything that is of interest of data principals get into being an interest of the fiduciary also, because a satisfied, happy customer, and in this case, with the proper consent, you are also demonstrating transparency and accountability, which is something which is very, very important in running your business. The process of registration, anyone who qualifies the criteria that was discussed in the previous slide, once the board is there would be an online application. You file up the application, the board would review your application, and based on the review, the board may accept or reject the applicant and inform the applicant about why he has been accepted or why he has been rejected. If the consent manager is somehow not able to fulfill his functions, his obligations, then the board will give him an opportunity to be heard, and if the board thinks that he is not capable of fulfilling his obligations, then the board may cancel or suspend his registration at any time during the board may also require some additional information from the consent manager organization so that it makes it easier for the board to decide whether the registration continues or gets rejected. So that's about the basic registration process for a consent manager with the DPDP rules. Remember, now we are expecting service providers to register themselves as consent managers, and then fiduciaries to hire them, appoint them as equally responsible consent managers, and perform the role of taking informed, specific, purpose-specific consent from the data principles, and manage those records and provide a proper provision of withdrawing the consent as and when required. So that's about the regulatory requirement. In our next video, we are going to talk about the details further of the statutory requirements that a consent manager has to fulfill to maintain his status. You can subscribe to my channel. We are going to talk a lot about the DPDP rules in the next few days. Share your feedback in the comment section, and if you like this video, please press the bell and the like icon. Thank you.